Well, there wasn't one sunrise sprinkled with dew, so I call bullshit. Okay, so I just saw the remake-boot-quel of Candyman, and before I say what I thought about, I should very much make it clear what I think of the original Candyman that came out back in 1992. I love the shit out of it. I am not a slasher film guy. That's not to say I don't respect them and the craft that goes into them and the creativity. It's wonderful what they've contributed to horror and everything. It's just not my thing. It's like how some people get into westerns and others don't. It's not that they're bad, you just don't get into them. But Candyman is one of the few that I really, really get into and I love the hell out of. There's just this wonderful atmosphere that just makes you feel uneasy and it's haunting. Like when I think of a film that just has a haunting environment and feel to it, Candyman is really one of the ones that pops in my head, especially again for a slasher film. So I really, really, really like it. Now we have this, honestly it is a sequel. It can also be called a reboot, I guess. It's actually very clever the way it does it, so I'm not 100% against just calling the same thing Candyman. It makes more sense than just calling Halloween, the one that came out a few years ago that they already have a sequel to that they should have just called Halloween as well, just make it as confusing as possible. But anyway, and I did really like this film. I really wanted to love it, and I feel like I could have loved it if there were just a few little tweaks. And they are smaller little issues with the film that don't ruin it by any means, but they do add up a little bit, where the first one I thought was just so masterfully done and just left this, feeling of unease throughout the majority of it and was so clever. This one has the elements set up, and when you see where it's all going and what they're doing with it, especially when it comes to continuing the ideas and the story and having it be kind of a reboot and a sequel as well, it's very, very clever. I think that's why it gets under my skin a little bit more when you see these little traditional slasher film elements that, especially now, are just everywhere, and they're kind of tired cliches, but they don't feel like a slasher film cliche where it's like, oh, we're putting it in because it's a slasher movie, we just have to put that in. No, it's kind of like the newer cliches, and that's a little frustrating, but what does work about it is very effective and does really remind me of the original, particularly the tone that you get throughout a good chunk of it. Not all of it, but a good chunk of it. It is one of those movies where you can kind of put together where it's going, but even if you can, it's not disappointing. It's still a very clever direction that they take it in. It's about this artist who's trying to get inspiration, and he hears the story about Candyman, and of course he does the thing where he looks in a mirror and says it 5 times, and the hijinks that follow. And it's very much about the people he's with and how both he and kind of the other people he's with, even though they talk about, all these sort of social issues and stuff, they're a little pretentious and sometimes have their heads up their own ass, and they acknowledge that. It's not like something like the remake of Black Christmas, where, it's very self-righteous and there's clear good guys and bad guys. It's like, no, there's very complicated stuff being discussed, and not everybody has the right answer to it. With that said, I feel like the commentary in the original was done a lot better and a lot more subtle, and you can probably guess, especially nowadays, that the commentary is gonna be a little on the nose in this, and it's in a film where it doesn't need to be. I think that's what got to me, because there are some films where they will spell it out and it works within, the realm of the movie, that's fine. But in both the original, and I feel like in this one, they didn't need to. The material is good enough that you didn't need to say what's haunting about something. You just let it be haunting. But they have to sit down and have these conversations, and, again, once in a while that's fine, but there's certainly moments where I felt like you could have watched this and read different things into it if you just took out one or two phrases or sentences or a couple little moments where it just spells out what it's trying to say. And that's a shame because, again, even though in the original there's definitely commentary, it's something where you can sort of read a couple different things into it. And I think that's why it's so effective. It's one of the many reasons it's so effective. Where in this, it's very, very clear what it's trying to say, where it could have said like a great number of things. But with that said, what's both the strength and kind of a little bit of the downfall is that a lot of it is about interpretation. You know, the guy is an artist, and it's about him trying to get certain points across. It's a little bit about the art world as well, and how pretentious people can be, and how always looking for the new thing, and oh, you don't understand this, or you don't get it, like that kind of thing, or this is too obvious, and so forth. And I know it's ironic me saying that, because I'm saying sometimes this film is too obvious. But I feel like that's what really could have worked about this, because so much of what they're doing with the Candyman lore and the ideas behind him ties into those urban legends and those interpretations, and it is so clever the way they tie it back to the first film when they give these very clever flashbacks whenever they talk about sort of the origin of Candyman or just what happened to someone before. You've seen this in the trailers, I'm sure, these little shadow puppets. And they look great. They have kind of a creepy look to them. They do technically tie into the story as well, because a little kid, liked playing with them. But that is the thing where I feel like for something that's talking about now, like different interpretations, there's really only one interpretation you can get out of this. But it still feeds in very well to the idea of telling a story and urban legends. And again, the way they set up the first one, tying it back to the main character of the first one, and what was remembered about her, like especially years later, so clever and just so brilliantly ties into what Candyman has become, what Candyman was, what Candyman is to different people. It is just so friggin' smart. And every time it starts to really go somewhere good with that, you'll have something like the cheesy comic relief, the gay best friend that comes in and is really wacky and yells everything and is only there to be the comic relief. It's really weird that Jordan Peele produced and directed movies. I know he didn't direct this. But that the comedy's not always that great. That's very bizarre. I thought for the most part it was pretty good in Get Out. There's a couple moments that's a little forced, but whatever. In Among Us, I really didn't think the comedy worked. It kind of felt like a really awkward Family Matters episode. But I felt like what it was trying to say in that it balanced it out, and it worked really, really well. Again, that's a perfect example of something in Us, where it's not quite 100% spelled out what they're trying to say, but you can definitely read a lot of different elements from it and stuff that you see going on around you. With this as well, though, not just the comedy, and there's not a ton, don't worry, it's not like it's forced everywhere, it's really not, and neither are jump scares or anything like that, but the slasher element of the movie, half the time, it works very effectively, like very effectively. There's one, without giving it away, that's, you'll know when you see it, that's around the shot of a building, that's all I'll say. And it is just like eerie. It is so well done. And there's a couple of kills like that. Where Candyman shows up is also just so clever. If anyone's seen Poltergeist 3, it's not particularly good, but one of the things they had is that, like, the poltergeists are in the mirrors. And I always said, man, I want to see that done better, like really taking advantage of it in another movie. And this one really does. The movie Oculus also kind of does it too, but not like this. This really has it where it does a lot of fun things with mirrors in this. And also the cinematography in terms of how Chicago is shot and everything's kind of upside down. The opening, sometimes just the simplest things are so effective. Like the opening credits is just these shots of Chicago skyscrapers and stuff, but they're upside down and they're in the fog. And that's such a simple thing, but it does make you a little dizzy and it does kind of throw you off a little bit. So little touches like that are really, really well done. So it kind of goes back and forth between being almost as good as the original and just as creepy and just as haunting, as just as powerful, and being just a little too on the nose or sticking a little too closely to the very traditional slasher tropes, which I know, like, Candyman I feel like had the slasher tropes, but it really did something new with it. This one feels like it's trying to kind of hit these check marks of, well, we have to have this in a slasher film, we have to have that, but not as much as other slasher films. Like, I feel like it does just enough different stuff, but the ones that it does have to meet, I feel like it didn't have to. Sometimes characters will pop up literally just to be killed, and I know that's part of slasher films, I get it, but there's one of the characters that there's this art gallery, and you see this girl looking at, this one of the works of art, she takes a picture of it. She does not pop up again until an hour into the film. Guess what happens to her? There's another one that happens with this, I think this brother and sister, where they do the same thing where someone says Candyman into the mirror. I have no idea if that was a flashback, if that was happening in modern day, if we saw them before. I have no idea what it was at all, and I think that is a little bit of a failing of the editing, which a good chunk of the time is done very well, and again, really creates that creepy atmosphere. But I think because they did have to, maybe there were notes saying you have to add some comic relief here, you have to have some laughs, or somebody has to die here, that kind of thing. It did feel a little forced. Speaking of forced, the ending of this, which does work out okay, but it is one of those endings where you say, oh, we're just doing this horror slasher trope thing now where somebody was behind it, that thing. And technically it does check out. Everything that the characters do in this movie does check out. Nobody does anything that's like, oh, I can't see that person doing that. No, they do check out technically, but it did not match the tone or the feel all the time. And again, I feel like it was not needed. And the so-called mastermind in this is literally forcing this Candyman stuff going on. And it's in a film where it does not have to be forced. I think so much of this is about letting these ideas and these real haunting, horrific elements just play out naturally. So I feel like some of these little twists and surprises and checkmark tropes you didn't need, and they really did bring the movie down a little bit, and it didn't ruin it, but they did add up. But with that said, the stuff that really works in it, the atmosphere, the acting, the recreation and continuation of so much of the eerie ideas and just that uncomfortable feel from the first one, they are here and they are effective. So in the end, I am really glad I saw it. I'm hoping they'll maybe continue it and continue to do something where they keep the story going, but they also try some different stuff as well. What I really like to see them get away from, though, is the more common slasher film tropes. And maybe that's because I'm just not a big fan of slasher films, like I said. But I don't think it's just that, because I can watch something like Halloween or Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, and still appreciate them and say, no, this is good for what it is. It's accomplishing what it's looking to accomplish. Candyman really seemed like just so on a different level, and this came really close, that when it didn't meet it, it did get a little frustrating, and I was just like, oh, because I feel like this could have been like the Dark Knight of sequel reboot masterpieces, you know what I mean? Like just really taking an idea and not only continuing it, but just really bringing it to a new level and updating it and just taking it in a different direction while still being faithful to the original. And a good chunk of the time it does that, but those couple of moments where it doesn't, they do add up and they do get in the way a little bit. So I'm still recommending it, especially if you like the original Candyman. I say this has way too much in it to ignore. It's worth checking out. If you're a slasher film fan, I think you'll like it. I think, like I said, they have those tropes in there, the check marks in there, but I would say see the first film to get an idea if this is something you'll be more into, because it does follow that vein a little bit more, but yes, it does have a lot more of the traditional slasher film elements in there as well. So if you've seen this film, what do you think? Well, first of all, what do you think of the original Candyman? Because I think that's the biggest one to compare it to. I haven't seen the sequels. I hear they're not very good, but the original I adore, and I really want to know what people think of this, if they have seen the original and how it compares, or if you haven't seen the original, if you've only seen this remake-boot-quel, if this is the only one you've seen, how did you like it? Does it make you want to see the original? Is it something where you feel like it works on its own, or were you really lost and you couldn't follow it? Definitely let me know what you think, and if you recommend it, or if you love it, hate it, do you agree, disagree? I'd love to know your thoughts, man, and I will see you next time. Take care.